So TJ, we're now living in a world where there are two pretty similar zombie survival open world games.
Yeah, extremely similar in terms of mechanics.
Deceptively similar. But the question is, can a open world zombie survival game, by another name, smell of sweets? So we've had access to the DayZ,
right?
The alpha version of the DayZ for about a week now.
Yeah.
What are two things you like and two things you don't like so far?
I don't know. I guess one thing that DayZ doesn't do that the DayZ does do that I think is a beneficial addition is the global inventory that you have across. Well, for first thing, you have like a list of characters like you would in an MMO, which is something DayZ doesn't do. And they have a global inventory that's shared where if you go to one of the hub towns, the equivalent of like Cherno or Electro, if you've played DayZ, you can actually send items into this global inventory to be retrieved later. And I like that because it kind of creates a sense of persistence and progression that DayZ lacks a little bit. Because obviously in DayZ, if you die, you lose all your stuff, period. And with this, you can be like, okay, I found this really cool gun, but instead of using it, I'm going to store it away for a later time, and you can start kind of building a stockpile of items that can be distributed to your other characters.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, loot is the core way you progress through any of these games. So
right.
It's nice that it's distinguishing itself from DayZ and how isolated and single character you are at that same time. Yeah.
I guess the other thing is the melee combat feels a little bit more, I guess, substantial and well tuned than DayZ. The engine was built with melee in mind, whereas the engine DayZ runs on was not. They kind of shoehorned it in later.
No, I totally agree. I mean, it's sort of, in a lot of ways, it sort of benefits from being designed from the ground up to be the game that it is. It really makes sense. I mean, I think DayZ has some unique inherent advantages. I mean, like the ballistic system of armor.
Right.
Being built atop a military simulator gives you a lot of features kind of out of the box. Things like character movement, animations. That's kind of what I'm noticing in DayZ that I'm liking a little bit more, just the simplicity of it and the systems. I mean, we haven't yet seen their player-authored questing system implemented yet.
Right.
But that's upcoming. It's going to sort of allow players to write down or select from a menu things that they'd like to assign other players, and players can kind of like pick up those jobs, assassinating other players or delivering goods. And having those things sort of baked into the game in a formalized way, even though I like the emergent gameplay of DayZ, is at least something different. Something that's really important to both of these games is the environment itself. And the DayZ's environment is a little bit smaller. It's about 160 square kilometers to DayZ's 225 square kilometers.
Right.
But I'm wondering just how you feel about the actual feel of the world itself, how immersive it might be, how it compares.
That's actually one of the things that I have not liked quite as much about the DayZ. Whereas,
me too.
Yeah, whereas, the map that for DayZ was built for Arma, it's a completely open, kind of based on real terrain. Feels like very living and very, you can go any direction you want at any time. Whereas the DayZ is a little bit more gamey. It feels more like it was designed for a game. There's cliffs that you can't walk up that essentially serve as walls and kind of funnel you through these corridors. You can't just take a hike over any given mountain and make your own shortcut somewhere.
I mean, you're never going to beat a game world that's satellite modeled after a portion of the Czech Republic and like the sort of authenticity that's always going to bring. I mean, just I think in DayZ the human mind's sort of able to recognize the way hills flow, the way valleys exist, the way power lines run between towns, all these like subtle details that even if they might not be functional in all cases, just give the world a sense of texture that feels real pretty much all the time. I like how compact the DayZ is. It's a little bit smaller.
Yeah,
and there are more enterable buildings, which
that's
has
a big
always
one.
has always been a frustrating thing in DayZ.
Yeah, and the towns are a little bit smaller, so I'm not sure. It probably, even with smaller towns, has a higher number of enterable buildings overall. Definitely a higher percentage. So it has that going for it. I like the look of the environment. Even though I was kind of disappointed that it wasn't as open.
Yeah.
I mean, it's based on Colorado. I'm from Colorado. I really like the whole alpine mountain kind of thing going on.
I think one of our metrics for this type of game is sort of like the unique player interactions that you get.
Right.
How what happens when you see another player, and just how what emerges from that. And I guess I'm curious, how would you compare that to DayZ and WarZ?
It's interesting because it is an alpha, and there's a lot of people in there that don't really know what they're doing yet. But honestly, I saw a lot of situations where there would just be a group of like 5 or 6 survivors that just met up in the middle of the town with no weapons. You start with no weapons, which is also the case in DayZ at this point.
Yeah.
I guess if it's a brand new character, you start with a flashlight, which you can technically hit people with, but it doesn't do a lot of damage.
Yeah.
I've seen several flashlight fights, but it seems like it's a lot of people will just run into each other in the middle of one of these loot areas and then just not really know what to do. And, maybe one of them has a gun that doesn't have any bullets in it, and they're trying to, like, threaten everyone else. So it doesn't seem as cutthroat as DayZ, but it also hasn't been around as long. So I don't think there are people that really know where the good sniping spots are and where to find the really good gear yet. So that probably has an effect on it.
Yeah, I mostly agree. I've encountered a few interesting situations, probably not as many as I've encountered in DayZ, and I think that's mostly due to the lack of familiarity.
Right.
And I think that'll come more as more features are implemented, like the questing system. But just it's interesting seeing how we talk about how the WarZ is kind of a copy-paste job in some ways. It's very much inspired. They admit openly that they're fans of DayZ. But you still see some of the same situations emerge. You see, players leading a conga line of zombies around a town, just helplessly running away, and just kind of watching and laughing at that, or deciding to intervene, or partnering up with a survivor who's at your level. Or I had a guy that just kind of walked up to me with a gun. I didn't have anything.
Yeah.
And he said, "Just drop your flashlight. I just want your flashlight." And I'm like, "Okay, dude, I'll drop my flashlight."
Yeah.
And I just sort of slowly back away, and he just takes it and.
Well, that's the interesting thing is if you die and your character comes back to life after like a period of an hour, you can log into that character again.
Yeah.
They don't respawn with any gear. So like if you've died once, you'll start with nothing. You won't have a flashlight. You won't have bandages or food or anything like that. I think so. It's an interesting way of doing things.
Yeah, but something that they layer atop that. Not every item is purchasable, but they do have sort of these very small microtransactions. Right. And there are like different forms of currency in the game. A lot of it isn't implemented yet, but you can sort of get a jump start with a new character. Or if you just lost all your stuff, you can buy like food items or medical items or like basic tools to at least sort of like, save yourself a little bit of time.
Yeah, you can actually even buy the biggest backpack with microtransactions, which is interesting because in DayZ, that's something you like search for days and days.
Totally.
To get an Alice bag.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if I'll take advantage of that myself. Kind of, we'll see as I play more. But for player, that sort of group of players that has a hard time investing 20, 30 hours into DayZ and like the crushing feeling, emotionally of losing all your stuff. For those guys, I'm glad that that's sort of a feature that's there for them.
Yeah, and the global inventory, I think, will kind of help with that too, because you can get the sense that, okay, I'm going to go out and just go on a hoarding run and bring stuff back for my global inventory, because you can't just grab it and log out. You have to grab it and then get back to the safe city. So you're risking stuff to get stuff, and you get to keep that stuff, which is, a mechanic I like.
So one more thing I want to isolate on, and that's just the actual combat of the game. We talked a little bit about melee, but how does sort of the feel of the weapons, what do you prefer? Which games sort of, ballistics and weapon handling you prefer? It's
hard to say because it's actually really hard to find guns in the WarZ. Like even in DayZ, where it's pretty hard to find a gun, I felt like WarZ was even harder. Like the first 2 guns I found didn't have any ammo in them, and I couldn't find any ammo for them. I finally got a hold of a shotgun at one point that actually had shells in it.
It feels a lot more like a Battlefield-style shooter to me. And that's not necessarily a criticism. I think that appeals to a lot of people. I was lining up zombies in my iron sights with like an M4 at probably 200 meters or something, and just, not having to worry about drop.
Hit scan, pretty much?
Yeah, for the most part. There are tracers. I think that's a server setting.
Okay.
But it's at least a different style. I would be less happy if the WarZ simply tried to emulate the Ballistics of Arma 2 and just failed miserably.
Yeah, well, I mean, that engine has been in development in some form going back to like the old Operation Flashpoint stuff, so it would take a long time to replicate.
Yeah, they've got a lock on that for sure.
Yeah.
Cool, so yeah, we'll continue to cover the WarZ and continue to talk about it, and yeah, look forward to kind of developing our opinions more as these games get closer to release. And you can pre-order it now and actually jump in there right now if you pre-order it for about $25.
Yeah, they've got like different tiers of pre-order, I think. So you can get different amounts of in-game currency depending on how much you spend. Pretty typical these days. Same thing MechWarrior Online did.
Right.
Yep. So, yeah, I'd say give it a look if you're interested in the genre.